Sweet. So, welcome to the Golconda mine. This would have been where the mill would have sat, and it was a fairly good-sized mill. I'm trying to remember, I think it was between 50 and 100 tons per day they could operate at this mill. The later mill was a flotation style mill. Not real clear on what the early mill was, but I think it wound up as a 20 stamp mill. And here's some pictures of what it looked like back in the day. As you can see, it was a fairly good size operation, and back when I first started driving around 16 years old up here in the mountains, I came up in here and I pulled in this little road, and here was this huge building still left here, and I was afraid somebody was going to chase me off, so I quickly abandoned ship and got out of here. But the mill was still, for the most part, intact back then. As you can see, there's nothing left now. It's completely rotted, and there's probably not a good timber up in there, but it's still pretty interesting. And it's a pretty steep hillside that this is built on. If we look down here, you'll see a lot of water coming, seeping out of the ground, and in a minute I'll take you up and show you where that's coming from. And I think there's an old adit here that it's seeping out of, and I think somebody purposely covered that up at some point. And take a look at this sign. This is the only time I've ever seen a sign from the Oregon Department or Oregon DEQ is at this mine. I've never seen another one, so I don't know what the deal is with that. I'll let you gander at this for a second, and then we'll go on up to the upper part of the mine. There's one thing that's kind of interesting here. It's right up in there, and I may get a little footage here in a minute of that. There's an old tank. It's filled up with rocks now, but some kind of tank there, made from wood and strapped. There's that tank, or whatever that was, full of rock now, but I don't think that was originally so. Well, let's go on up. So down below, we saw the mill, or what's left of it. And here's what's left of a head frame. And it's still got the shev wheel up on top. I'm surprised somebody hasn't come up and tried to swipe that, but I think if they did, this thing would probably fall over. I was up here last fall and I actually did a video here, but the audio turned out terrible, so I'm redoing it. But I'm actually kind of surprised that this is still standing. I mean, there's not much left holding this up. And last fall when I was here, the shaft was still open, but full of water, and still the same today. I believe this was a 2-compartment shaft. Yeah, it definitely looks like a 2-compartment. I think this last head frame they stuck up they were only utilizing one of the compartments though. And I don't believe this was the original head frame. I think in the late 30s and then the late 40s, a guy that kind of promoted a lot of mines around here, well, he promoted them if he had a vested interest in them. I'll think of his name here in a minute. He made a big proposal, got some guys to buy off, and they were going to come in and do some work in here, try and stope some spots that were missed. John Arthur, that's his name. And evidently it wasn't real successful. You know, this John Arthur character, you'll see his name on a lot of the old documents. And he's a self-described mining engineer. And from what I understand from the state geologist that was here forever, that if he had some kind of interest in the mine, he would give it all thumbs up, great. If you didn't pay him off just right, then, well, you probably weren't going to get a great report out of him. And on this one, it sounded like after the war was over, he came in and remapped some of the tunnels and was going to go in and try stoping some of it out again. And evidently not real successful with that endeavor. It didn't seem to last more than a couple years of poking around. From what I understand, this one was pretty well played out in most of the areas they had worked. There's a lot of ground under here that was never really explored, and so there's probably still a lot of good ground in here, but you know, it's one of those things with mining. If you don't have the capital to come in and invest, you know, a lot of serious exploration work, like, you know, diamond drilling, ground penetrating radar, all that kind of good stuff, well, ground like this is probably not real feasible for a small miner. You know, you might get lucky, come in and find a spot that's pretty good here and there, but you know, for the most part, the old timers got the easy stuff out of these kind of mines. Keep in mind though, they didn't find every vein that's up in this country. There's lots of veins that are still here. You know, probably more will be uncovered. A big rainstorm comes along and uncovers some new ground, a vein may show up, and problem now is actually being able to mine, you know, with the regulations the way they are, which is incredibly goofy to me. We now have the technology to actually come in, and the equipment to come in and rehab the ground after we mine, but they've made it so incredibly hard to do anything that you know, nothing happens. I've heard it said, rumored that this was 1,320 feet straight down. It's not. It's 500 and roughly 10 feet. There's some reports mentioning 1,320 feet, but it's actually an adit that's right behind here, and it's completely collapsed. We can go look at it here in a minute. But there was an adit that took off right here that was 1,320 feet long, and it's mentioned in some reports, and some people get those reversed, thinking this was 1,320 feet deep, but this was 510 feet. And here's the map that kind of shows that. As you can see, compared to the Columbia, which sank their shaft, I think their shaft was 800 feet. Could give or take there a little bit. Maybe it's 900 feet. And you can see compared to this shaft that, you know, there's no comparison. Their shaft is quite a bit deeper than this one. So let's go poking around here some more. There's a really cool old ore bin over here I want to show everybody. First, let's go see if we can find this adit. Okay, right here is where I believe that adit went in. You can see up on the hillside, right up there, it's all collapsed up the hillside where they were following that vein. And this is the same vein that came across from the North Pole through the Columbia and over this way. It didn't seem to be quite as rich over here. At least there wasn't as much development work done here. At about 7,000 feet total. You can definitely see the sunken ground up there. And right there is the head frame. While we're wandering around, I'll kind of explain the geology up here. And all this here is just slash when they logged it a number of years ago. Which brings something else to mind while we're at it. These are private ground. Most of these mines here in Northeast Oregon, they were of any size and developed around the turn of last century. Most of them were patented ground. It was pretty easy to get ground patented back then, so why not do it? And so when you come up to these, if you're looking around, don't be stealing stuff. The landowners have been nice enough not to post their ground, so you can still come up here and look. But don't be coming up here and destroying stuff and picking up artifacts. Again, this is private ground, and they could just as easily lock you out of it. So keep that in mind when you're up here. Treat it with some respect. Treat it like your own ground, which should be the same for public ground too, I would assume. But But there's a fairly decent sized tailing pile, well, waste rock pile here. Here's this ore bin. Again, I think this was put in later because the original mill over there, they kind of have a little covered tramway or railroad tracks or railroad tracks or cart tracks that went along over there. As you can see in this picture, it's pretty easy to see where that went around there. And then the mill was down below here just a little ways, maybe 100 yards over there. So they had that covered all the way over. But here's this pretty cool little ore bin. And all those bolts, I don't know, this could be an old one, come to think of it, because last year when I was down there around it, all those bolts that go around it are all hand forged. Those are quite a lot of work that went into those big long bolts. The eyes are all hand forged. It's pretty amazing. Now what that fed into, I'm really not sure. Whether they backed a vehicle up there or a wagon and filled it up, and I'm not sure what they were doing there, but across the way is where the Columbia mine is, right on that other hillside. And right over there would have been the mill. And here's what that mill would have looked like 100 years ago. Obviously from back then they cut most of the timber down and used it. It probably had a sawmill on site. So from this point you could have easily seen the mill, and now you can't see the remnants of it at all. It's really not that far over there, but the timber's thick enough you can't see it now. A lot of this is reprod from the last time they logged it. But that that covered railway would have went right over there to the mill site. So back to the geology, which I started like minutes ago, but I'm finally back to it. Up in this ground, and most of these mines in this area, what they were after was the contact zone between granodiorite and argillite. And most of what they found was actually in the argillite. And it wasn't just, randomly in argillite, because argillite really normally carries no value to it. But in the boundary of that contact zone, it was crushed up, highly altered, and then hydrothermic fluid filled it, re-cemented it together. It's usually called brecciated. So it's kind of brecciated argillite, and they were after that stuff. And there were some veins, pretty wide quartz veins in here too. But if it was mainly quartz, it seemed to be fairly barren. There was a little gold in it, but the values are pretty low from what I understand. So what they were after was where that was crunched up, brecciated, and that's what they were after. They would take that and mill that, and that's where they'd get their best values. Most of what I've seen of this mine seemed like they were hovering around ½ an ounce per ton, maybe a little more here and there. Anything less than that, they didn't seem to mine or stope it out a whole lot. So this ground is also, most of the gold was carried in sulfides at any depth at all. And it's a little harder to get the gold out being locked up in sulfides. So a lot of times early on they really didn't have a good method of getting out, so recovery was pretty poor. But that's, I think later on, like after World War II, they tried to come in with that flotation plant and operate and get more efficiency and get more gold out, more recovery. But like I said, it didn't seem to pan out. And anytime reopening one of these old mines anyway, if it's been flooded, is a huge pain. And earlier in the year, this runs water out the top. And this particular mine, if I remember right, there's only 2 portals from adits or tunnel levels. Most of it was accessed from this shaft behind me. And I've looked for the lower adit several times, and I think I've figured out where it was at. I think it was covered up with a dozer or something. There's really nothing left there. There's some water seeping out of the ground down there from this, probably most likely. It just kind of what remains of that portal, it's just kind of oozing out of the ground down there. But earlier in the year, this runs water out, and it smells like sulfur. This tailing pile, if you scratch around on it at all, smells like sulfur. So there was a lot of sulfides in this ground. Well, let's go look around at some other things around this mine. Okay, right down below me is the mill. I'm trying to get down there to it without falling and breaking my neck. You know, here's kind of looking back at one of the pictures of this. You can tell this mill stuck up in the air quite a ways, and that little covered railway would have come right through there, and probably about where I'm standing would have been the very top of the mill. It probably had a pretty good sized ore bin. You can see all that seepage down there. That's coming where I think the portal would have been, which is up in this little draw here, but there's really nothing left to even show it was there. So right down there is where we were just a few minutes ago at the start of the video, back in 1988 or 89 when I kind of first started driving on my own up in this country. A lot of this building was still standing then, and I wish I would have been smart enough to get some pictures of it. There's a couple more little interesting things over on this hillside that I'll show you real quick and wrap this up. So over there is where the mill is. Right down below us is Fruit Creek. See it down through the trees. There's some tailings from right over there, that's tailings from the Columbia mine. And somewhere over there is, I think, the 200 level of the Columbia mine. It comes out somewhere over there. A couple people have told me that was still open, you know, a number of years ago, but I've looked around there, I can't find it. I kind of think if it was open, somebody covered it. But right here is something interesting. And I'm not sure this is part of the Golconda or the Columbia. But I believe this is a stope that's collapsed in. You can see some timbering down in there, some big bolts. This might have been a shaft, but I don't see much evidence of a waste rock pile around it. Looks to me like a stope that's collapsed. And the goofy thing is, there's a bunch of water that you can obviously tell right there seeping in that comes from, you know, underground. It's highly mineralized water. It's got that rust color to it. Kind of smells like sulfur a little bit. And I've walked all over this hillside up here trying to figure out where it's actually coming from. And I just can't find the real source of it. One of those little mysteries that there's evidently a adit or something back up in here that has been covered up or completely collapsed where you can't really even tell where it was, and the water's just kind of oozing up out of the ground up there and comes down in here. And this really doesn't look like it's open to anywhere. It might be a little bit back that way, but I'm sure not going to climb down in there. So hold everything. I was just up there talking to you where that open stope is. I come down here and decided to check one more time. Sure enough, across the creek there's some tracks coming out of the hillside. I don't think that portal's open, but we'll go take a look over there real quick, but I don't think anything's open. I'm still not sure if this was part of the Argonaut or the Columbia. It's on the opposite side of the creek from the Columbia, so I'm not sure. There's a pretty good sized rail coming out of here. This isn't kidding around type rail. A lot of these mines around here in Eastern Oregon are pretty small rail. These are actually pretty decent sized rails that come out of this. Let's go up here, and looks like 100 other people have come in here and snooped. Ouch. Right down in there, you can see what little remains. This opening. You can see the water seeping out. Would have went back in right there. You still see a little bit of the framework down in there, but she's collapsed. And I think if we got back in there anyway, it would be collapsed from, you know, where we were at. You can see that stope was collapsed. So I don't know if you can see it. But the rock over there is that argillite. And you come right over here, and it's that granodiorite. Let's just call it granite. And right here is a perfect example of what they were after. It's this argillite brecciated with quartz. So this was all crunched up in the ground at one point, and the hydrothermic fluid come up, filled in all these little cracks, cemented it all back together, and formed this brecciated argillite. And this was the stuff they were digging for, from what I understand. Like I said before, a lot of times they had pretty good sized quartz veins, but they were for the most part barren. And the argillite by itself, like that piece right there, without all the little stringers in it, is pretty much, there's nothing in it. And here's another example of argillite right here. And this really contains no value unless it's been, it's got the cracks in it, it's been re-cemented together. This stuff is pretty much useless. Right over here though, you can see this one. It's got some quartz attached to it. It probably had more of it over here at one time that was cemented together with the quartz. This probably would have been good stuff. So I thought I'd share some closing thoughts with you about this mine and a lot of the mines up in this area. Like I mentioned earlier, these are private ground, and if you want the ability to come snoop around old mines and check out what they have to offer, tread extremely carefully. Most of these are private ground, like I said. Some of them aren't, but majority of these larger ones are. So if you enjoy this kind of stuff, don't go in here getting yourself in trouble, and definitely leave it like you found it. Don't be taking stuff. Don't be in here, just vandalizing stuff, tearing stuff down. Like I said, the landowners have been generous enough to not post this ground yet. And a lot of these mines up in here are the same way. It's not posted or anything. There's no trespassing signs on them. There are no trespassing signs on them yet. So if you do come up, again, respect the land and don't be up here thieving stuff. Some brecciated rock right there. A little update. The reason I haven't done a lot of these mining videos is I've just kind of felt like crud the last few months. Come to find out, I've got a big kidney stone that I got to deal with. It's been driving me nuts for months. I didn't know what it was. It didn't hurt like a regular kidney stone. It's because it never could get out of my kidney. It's like 3/4 of an inch, maybe a little bigger now. So this week I'm going to have that taken care of. Fingers crossed. So hopefully after that I'll feel a little better, be able to get out and get some more of these mining videos done. Last couple of weeks I felt pretty decent, so evidently it's got big enough it just quits blocking things up, or blocks it all the time. I don't know. Enough of the health stuff, that's boring stuff. Who wants to talk about it? So after I get that done, hopefully I'll be able to get out and get more of these videos done. And I had a big list of stuff I wanted to get done this summer, and I'm way behind on all of those videos. But just so everybody knows, I've got more planned as soon as I get this thing taken care of and kind of solve the problem why I've been getting them. We kind of figured that out, so hopefully we can iron that out too. With all that garbage, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope to see you on the next one. Give us a thumbs up once in a while. And I'm going to leave you with some drone footage. Have a great day.